All right, welcome back, everyone. We are at it again today with another poem by 18th century neoclassical poet Philip Freneau. We're going to be taking a look at On a Honeybee today. It's quite an interesting poem, actually, because there's a little bit of divided critical debate about what the poem is really about. Earlier generations of critics are going to make the claim that the poem is actually not really about the honeybee, it's more about the wine. They're going to situate this poem in the tradition of what we call anacreontic verse. Anacreontic verse, which is verse about wine, about women, carpe diem, sort of light, delightful poetry about some of life's more enjoyable pleasures. Later, we're going to take a look at a second tradition that says, no. The wine, the honeybee, all of the different symbols that we find in the poem's symbolic register are actually coded. They're coded references to other things. Not that the poem is an allegory, but that the poem is making a discursive reference to discourses that we find in the so-called, again, I'm not a huge fan of the term, the so-called American Revolution. Now, this is a poem that's written in the years immediately after the American Revolution. What we're going to see is there's an interesting choice of language Freneau is using throughout that does suggest he might be going beyond, at least in some sense, a poem just about wine, just about the joys that come from imbibing. So we're going to take a look at that, but before we do that, two things. One, we're going to read the poem out loud. We're going to go line by line and give it a parse, meaning we're going to try to figure out, okay, on a literal level, what is this poem actually saying? Before we do that, I would be remiss if I did not mention, take a look in the description. You will see I have an interesting program for you all. If you're not old enough to imbibe, it does mean you are old enough to become a member of the College Degree Accelerator. You can take a look at that in the description. It's a program I designed to help you graduate college in 2 years. Whether you're already in college or whether you're in high school, this program has absolutely everything you need to help you save, in some cases, up to $76,000. This is something that I myself did, believe it or not. Didn't save quite that much money. Tuition was not that expensive a decade ago, but I did manage to graduate from Ohio State at the age of 19. So if this is something that interests you, take a look in the description. It's quite an interesting program. But with no further ado, let's get at the poem and give it a quick read. So this is Philip Freneau's On a Honeybee. Thou born to sip the lake or spring, or quaff the waters of the stream, why hither come on vagrant wing? Does Bacchus tempting seem? Does he for you the glass prepare? Will I admit you to a share? Did storms harass or foes perplex? Did wasps or kingbirds bring dismay? Did wars distress or labors vex? Or did you miss your way? A better seat you could not take than on the margin of this lake. Welcome, I hail you to my glass. All welcome here you find. Here let the cloud of trouble pass. Here be all care resigned. This fluid never fails to please and drown the griefs of men or bees. What forced you here we cannot know, and you will scarcely tell. But cheery we would have you go and bid a glad farewell. On lighter wings we bid you fly. Your dart will now all foes defy. Yet take not, too deep a drink, and in the ocean die. Here bigger bees than you might sink, even bees full 6 feet high. Like Pharaoh then you would be said to perish in a sea of red. Do as you please, your will is mine, enjoy it without fear, and your grave will be this glass of wine, your epitaph a tear. Go, take your seat in Charon's boat, we'll tell the hive, you died afloat. Good, quite charming, little delightful verse. Now you can see clearly it's about wine, it's about drinking, it's about the atmosphere that comes from a nice summer's imbibing, so a good poem for the season. But when we parse it line by line, we're going to see, so first and foremost, this is clearly telling a short little narrative in lyric verse about a honeybee, about a bumblebee. What do we hear here? Thou born to sip the lake or spring or quaff the waters on the stream. Great. So the bee is made to drink water. The bee is like Milton. The bee is a water drinker. He comes on vagrant wing. Why? Perhaps it's Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, tempting him to come drink of the wine. And the poet says, will I admit you to a share? He's asking a rhetorical question here saying, You have been tempted, perhaps, by the Roman god Bacchus to stray from the flowers and come partake in this beautiful, delicious wine. Will I offer you a share of the wine? Let's find out. Now, he continues asking rhetorical questions to the bee. Did storms harass or foes perplex? Did wasps or kingbirds bring dismay? Did wars distress or labors vex? Or did you miss your way? So here he's saying, what is it? Were you tempted? Were you fleeing a war? Were there some sort of foes that were coming after you? We're never really given a reason. All we know is that the bee has found its way to the glass of wine, and Philip Freneau seems very glad that it has. He says, a better seat you could not take than on the margin of this lake. So here we get the repetition of lake. So now instead of a lake or spring of water, we have what must seem from the bee's perspective, this beautiful, wonderful, delicious lake of wine. Even the phrase lake of wine brings a smile to my face. Now, what happens? Welcome, direct address to the bee. I hail you to my glass. So a very formal, nice, almost aristocratic welcome. All welcome here you find, here let the cloud of trouble pass, here be all care resigned. This fluid never fails to please and drown the griefs of men or bees. So whatever brought you here, whatever griefs, whatever worries in life you may have, you will find them drowned in a nice glass of wine. It always reminds me, there's a very funny Argentine copla which says, translated to English, something to the effect of, I drink to drown my pains, but my pains are really good swimmers, right? Which is true, right? Wine temporarily eases the pains of life. Even the Bible says, right? What is it? This is in Psalms, or is it might be in Proverbs, where it actually says, no, in the Psalms it says, wine gladdens the hearts of men. And at the end of the book of Proverbs, there's a line that says that drinking eases the pains of life on earth. So the Bible acknowledges this clear tradition about alcohol. And Philip Freneau is drawing on this, where he says effectively, no, come, drink the wine. All your cares, all your troubles, all your worries will be dissolved, at least for the moment. Most of us find that our pains are pretty good swimmers. In any case, what forced you here? Now this is interesting. He's suggesting it wasn't the bee's vagrancy per se, as he suggested earlier, but there was something forcing the bee to come to the wine, which is quite interesting. We'll come back to that later. We cannot know, and you will scarcely tell, but cheery we would have you go and bid a glad farewell. So I don't know why you came here, but I want to send you away cheery. So I'm going to be a good host and invite you to imbibe of this delicious glass of wine. On lighter wings we bid you fly, your dart will now all foes defy. So he says you will leave on lighter wings, meaning presumably you're going to feel yourself a little bit lighter, you're going to feel a little bit happier, and your dart, the sting of the bee, will now be able to resist all foes. So now he's saying the wine is going to enable you to not just feel better, but also have the sort of beer muscles necessary to go fight your enemies, whether that's the wasps or the kingbirds or some warring army. You will now be able to fight them off on the strength of this wine. Interesting thought process. We're going to see might be something deeper going on here. Yet take not too deep a drink and in the ocean die. So he's saying, be careful not to drink too much though, because if you gulp down too much of this wine, you will die in this, again, nice metaphor, ocean of this pleasant fluid, right? Here, bigger bees than you might sink, even bees full 6 feet high. Bees full 6 feet high. Now, interesting that he says bees full 6 feet high. Clearly he's talking about men. Why he says bees full 6 feet high, is it just a joke? We will look into that. But he's saying, look, men have trouble with alcohol. Many a mighty man has sunk his ship in the ocean of wine. And you, bumblebees, should be careful because you're not as strong as a man. If wine can make a man weak, wine can certainly make you weak. If wine can kill a man, wine can certainly kill a bee. Like Pharaoh, then, you would be said to perish in a sea of red, which is quite a funny little play on words here, double entendre. So, if you know the story from the book of Exodus, Pharaoh is chasing the Israelites, who are led by Moses. They get to the Red Sea. They think they've trapped them. Moses parts the waters of the Red Sea. The Israelites go through the Red Sea. Pharaoh tries to follow them through the Red Sea. The waters unpart and collapse on top of Pharaoh and his men, and they all die. And so here Philip Freneau is saying, you, like Pharaoh, will perish in a sea of red. So Pharaoh died in the Red Sea. You, bumblebee, will die in the Red Sea of this wine. In actual fact, I think bumblebees don't make honey, do they? I don't know if that's just an apocryphal popular belief or not. but I probably should be saying honeybee. In any case, do as you please, your will is mine. Enjoy it without fear. So he says, no, it's fine. You do whatever you want. Enjoy the wine. But then it's implied the bee does drink too much wine and it dies. And your grave will be this glass of wine. So here's still kind of conditional. It will be this glass of wine. Your epitaph, a tear. So you won't have an epitaph, obviously, because you don't die in a grave. Whose tear is it? It's implied that it's Philip Freneau's tear. But Philip Freneau does not seem that sad. In fact, even the rhyming couplets, said, read, boat, afloat, they have a kind of light, jaunty tone to them. Is Philip Freneau really crying for the poor honeybee? Probably not. Probably not. And so we should question, why is he saying he's going to cry for this bumblebee? He's going to cry for this honeybee's death if it seems like it's something that's not that serious to him. Go, take your seat in Charon's boat. Charon, the boatman of the dead. Anyone who's read Dante or knows something about the classics would know that. We'll tell the hive of honeybees, you died afloat. So afloat in this sense could mean on your feet, right? You died like fighting. But the double entendre is you died afloat, meaning you died literally like drunk face up in this glass of wine. Quite an interesting little poem, is it not? I find it delightful. Now, the standard interpretation of this poem, talked about this, it is a neoclassical mock ode. So we've mentioned before that in the Enlightenment, neoclassical verse, very popular. We haven't looked at anything very explicitly neoclassical from Philip Freneau. You'll see when we get to Phyllis Wheatley's verse, very, very neoclassical. Here we have some neoclassicism. We have the reference to Bacchus, and we have, again, the anacreontic verse, after Anacreon, the famous Greek poet who wrote odes. He's one of the 7 famous Greek lyric poets. His odes were about wine and women. You could think of him like the Greek Libai, or the Greek Charles Bukowski, who, oh my goodness, I have to make videos on the poems of Charles Bukowski. Someone remind me to do that. We haven't gotten anywhere near that period of time yet. I've been focusing a lot on the early American stuff, but at some point I need to make some analyses of Charles Bukowski's poems. Bukowski is, or novels. My goodness, the novels too. Bukowski is wonderful. And there's lots of good stuff about Bukowski on YouTube, but not scholarly analysis. It's all kind of like low-level content. We need some better stuff. Bukowski deserves better. In any case, so it's an anacreontic verse. It's verse about wine. It's proto-romantic in ways. We see the honeybee being described as having some sort of beautiful relationship to nature. It's able to be didactic. The honeybee can teach us things. And we get a standard memento mori. Remember that you're going to die. Life is going to end. So far, so good. I mean, I think if I were to say that about the poem, you would agree with it. This is what most early 20th century critics said about the poem, is that, yeah, it's playing with standard Greek themes. There's nothing distinctly American about this poem. It's just about a bumblebee that dies in a glass of wine. We could imagine really like any of the neoclassical poets in Britain having written a similar poem, or even any of the classical poets. Like, how difficult would it be to imagine, I don't know, Horace having written a poem like this? I don't think it would be that big of a stretch of the imagination to imagine this poem being written by another classical author. So far, so good for the standard interpretation. Now, if you have questions so far, please put them in the comments. As I mentioned, I love reading the comments. Reading the comments is one of the great joys of having a YouTube channel. So if you have questions or just you want to tell me something, put that down below. But I'm going to give a different context. So I mentioned this to some of you before. I am interested in the new historicism. I was trained to do new historical criticism at Ohio State by some very solid professors there who do new historical work, where we read essentially the class. We did a lot of Foucault, we did a lot of Greenblatt, we looked at a lot Louis Menand, right? We read a lot of new historical authors. And one of the methods that's used in the new historicism is discursive analysis. And this is a very simple form of discursive analysis, but basically what we're looking for is, okay, we see the poem talks about wine, we see the poem talks about bees. Are bees in wine referred to elsewhere in colonial American discourse? And when they are referred to what do they refer? Is there some other register of understanding these terms? That's a standard new historical move, and it's what we're going to do here. And it turns out there is actually something deeper going on here. So one of the historical contexts is, I think Americans call this Madeira. I think the proper pronunciation is Madeira. So I may be pronouncing it wrong depending on from which perspective you want to look at this, but Madeira wine. which I have never had. I should probably at some point try a glass of it. But Madeira wine is extremely popular in colonial America, and it shows up as a symbol time and time again. Madeira wine is going to be very important in Hawthorne. That's something else I have to make videos on very soon. Hawthorne's short stories, my goodness. In Legends of the Province House, Madeira wine is a central symbol. Well, why? Why is it so important? We have here is in the time of Charles II, we get the marriage treaty, the so-called marriage treaty with Portugal. England and Portugal have always had good relations with each other, or at least for the most part, not like English relations with Spain. Portugal was always like the nicer sister to the English Empire. And so we have the marriage treaty with Portugal in the 17th century. And as a result of that, we have favored trade with Portugal. Now, mercantilism is still in effect, particularly in the colonies. So there are duties like taxes, tariffs. Everybody's been talking about tariffs, right? Well, now you get it. Mercantilism was a high tariff system of economics. The short version of mercantilism is, think of it this way. If there were free trade, you would effectively be giving the resources of the colonies to your geopolitical enemies. So if Americans were free to buy Spanish wine, everybody knows Spanish wine is the best wine. I 100% believe it. Spanish wine, Argentine wine is very good. French wine it's okay. It's a little overrated. Italian wine is good. There's even Mexican wine, Chilean wine, all very good. But the best wine comes from Spain. I'm thoroughly convinced of this. Portuguese wine, pretty good too. The best wine comes from Spain. You want to get a nice glass of Spanish wine in the colonies, you're going to have to pay a heavy duty, because if there were no duty, you could just freely trade with the Spanish. You would be giving colonial resources like furs, tobacco, all these expensive luxury products to our geopolitical enemies, if assuming them were British in this context, right? And then Spain is going to get all the benefits of having those products. And Spain is going to get stronger, and that's a missed opportunity for England to get stronger. And so the idea is, if you're going to buy goods from other countries, you have to pay a duty or a tariff on them. Because now, at the very least, yes, Portugal, Spain, France, they're getting something from our colonies, but we're also getting something because you're paying a tax on them. So even though Portugal and England had a pretty good relationship, probably one of the best geopolitical relationships England has with anybody on the European continent, to be honest, there's still a duty that's leveled on Madeira wine. And it makes sense when you think about it. 95% of Madeira exports are consumed in the colonies. So from this tiny Portuguese island, 95% of the exterior consumption of Madeira wine is going to be in the colonies. And the reason for that is there are no wine quality grapes in the 13 colonies. And everybody knows, maybe, hypothetically, you can make wine in England, but that's disgusting. Who on earth would drink English wine? I don't even know if there is English. There is English wine production now. I don't know if there is in the 18th century. But in any case, if you're going to drink English wine, that's gross, right? And so there's no wine quality grapes in the 13 colonies yet, and there's no domestic production of wine. And so if you're going to be drinking wine, you're going to be getting it from Madeira, and you're going to be drinking Madeira wine. Now, important event from one of my favorite figures in American history to hate on. You have the Liberty Affair, which is John Hancock. If you don't know about John Hancock, everybody remembers him, the founding father who signed his name really big. That's fitting not because John Hancock was such a big patriot, but because he's really annoying and obnoxious. I am not an American Revolution person. You probably have figured that out if you've watched my other videos. I have very strong feelings about the American Revolution that are not in line with the standard narrative that we as Americans are given about the Revolution. It's fine. But I have respect for most of the founding generation. I have a ton of respect for Jefferson, who was a genius, who was a polymath. I may not agree with Jefferson, but Jefferson was a genius. George Washington was an extraordinarily brave figure, a very good statesman. Adams was a phenomenal statesman. Philip Freneau, as a poet, I respect him, even though I don't necessarily agree with his perspective. I have a lot of respect for members of the founding generation. I have very little respect for Hancock. Hancock was, the comparison I give to my students is Hancock is the 18th century equivalent of El Chapo. Okay? He's a smuggler. That's what he does. He breaks the law, and he deals in contraband. That's his M.O. And of course his stupid ship, they named it the Liberty. Of course they named it the Liberty, right? It's all... What Hancock did was, Jefferson, a man like Thomas Jefferson, believed in the Enlightenment. Whatever you want to say about Thomas Jefferson sincerely believed in everything he said. Hancock adopted the Enlightenment because he wanted free trade so he could make more money. That's it's pure and simple. To call Hancock a patriot is a joke. It's a joke. It's because Hancock refused to pay the tariffs because he hated his country. His country was England. He hated his country. He liked his personal gain more than he liked his country. And so he refused to pay tariffs on the wine he imported. That is not a patriot, okay? But in any case, Hancock wants American independence so that he doesn't have to pay taxes. Like low-level stuff. He's a smuggler. He's the El Chapo of... Actually, no. That's insulting to El Chapo. I actually have significantly more respect for El Chapo than I do for John Hancock. Anyway, moving forward. 95% of Madeira exports are consumed in the colonies. Okay? Liberty Affair. What happens? John Hancock brings in 25 pipes, which are really, really big barrels of wine, into the colonies. He says, I have 25 pipes. They clear him. Nothing happens. A month later, a British, remember everyone's British at this time, okay? Everyone's British. A customs official says, actually, that didn't happen. What did happen was Hancock brought 100 pipes of wine. He bribed us. We refused to accept his bribe. Then he tied us up inside the ship and forced us to accept the bribe. And we were quiet about it for a month, but now we're not going to be quiet anymore. He brought in 75 extra pipes of Madeira wine. And he did this so he didn't have to pay tax on all of it. And in fact, why would he come back from Madeira with a ship that was only 25% full? Because 100 pipes of wine would have been full capacity. He said, that's garbage. He didn't come back with 25 pipes of wine. I know that, you know that, everybody and their mother knows that John Hancock, being this suave businessman that he is, did not come back with 25 pipes. He came back with 100. And he tied us down, he bribed us, we accepted the bribe, but now we're not going to be quiet. Now, everybody gets up and is there evidence? Is there not? Is it just this one guy's testimony? You can go look into that and make a conclusion. I know I have. But the long and the short of it is it causes a riot in which 3,000 people in Boston get really angry, as people in Boston are prone to do during this time period and still to this day, and they start a small-scale riot. This is before, by the way, the infamous Boston Tea Party, the Boston Tea Yankee Doodle, right, all the garbage about the Boston Tea Party. This is before that, okay? That's the Liberty Fair. And so what you should be starting to see is Madeira very well associated with the colonies, very strongly associated with patriotism and with anti-colonial sentiment, like anti-quote-unquote British sentiment, really anti-monarchical sentiment. Madeira is associated with liberty, with freedom, with free trade, and with the Enlightenment, at least to the early founding generation. And it's because all the founding fathers loved to drink it. It was Jefferson's favorite wine. He toasted the Declaration with Madeira wine. We have John Adams' letter to Abigail Adams, in which he says, essentially at the Constitutional Convention, everybody's getting loaded with Madeira wine, which is true. Early Americans drank a lot. Founding fathers drank a lot. But early Americans in general drank a lot. In, I think, 18th century up to the 1820s, average American alcohol consumption for a farmer, I think, was at 11 alcoholic units per day. I remember reading an article about this. It's off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that. Someone can probably go find it. But in early America, a farmer was consuming 11 alcoholic units per day. And if you look at Ben Franklin's autobiography, where he talks about the printers consuming like their vast quantities of beer, it's about 11 to 12 alcoholic units they're consuming per day. So that was pretty normal. That's, if you don't know what an alcoholic unit is, that's 11 shots, that's almost 2 full bottles of wine, or that's almost a 12-pack of beer. Okay, so it's a pretty heavy dose of alcohol to be drinking every day. You're not supposed to drink more than, if you're a man, 3 alcoholic units in a day. So that's a pretty heavy amount of drinking that's going on. And most of that drinking is Madeira wine or rum. In any case, John Adams says, yeah, everybody's drinking Madeira at the Constitutional Convention. Washington drank it all the time. He used it for his toothaches. The Marshall Court. Yeah, Marshall loved his wine, as did the other members of the Marshall Court, the Supreme Court under Marshall. Everybody drank Madeira wine. Dinner parties in Washington, we have all sorts of letters talking about the late 18th century. Everybody will have, at the end of a meal, a glass of Madeira wine and some walnuts. That was like a standard way to finish a meal. Let's just say farewell party, not farewell party. But Washington 1787 farewell party, they consumed 54 bottles of Madeira among 55 attendees. And there was more alcohol. You can go look. There was whiskey. There was a lot of alcohol at that party. But one of the biggest consumed alcohols was Madeira wine. And we also get the general discourse of what is called the intoxicating draughts of liberty, equating liberty with alcohol. Because liberty, like alcohol, is intoxicating, it is freeing. It can be dangerous, right? That's a very federalist perspective. It can be dangerous. Now, and of course, Freneau is not a federalist, but the federalist is, liberty can be dangerous, just as alcohol can be dangerous, but it is intoxicating. It is liberating. It is a great feeling to have imbibed. It is a great feeling to imbibe liberty as well. So that's the context around Madeira wine. Now, is Madeira mentioned in the poem? No. It could have been some other wine. But what we do see is that wine very distinctly is considered a drink of the patriots. Wine becomes a symbol of free trade precisely because we can't grow wine in America and we can't grow wine in England. So wine and free trade are linked together. Wine and intoxication are linked together, obviously. Wine and liberty are linked together. Now, most specifically with Madeira, but we should think about, this poem really is about wine. Is there some sort of link? Well, maybe, but we'll have to keep investigating. What other discourses do we see at play here? We have the historical context of Madeira wine. We also have, I'll move so you can see his cute little face. Yeah, we have the historical context of drones. Not drones in the modern sense, but drones as in bees. Okay, bees have a huge body of discourse about them in the West. Starting with, and this goes back to classicism, as well as neoclassicism that we see in the Enlightenment, this goes back to Virgil. So hopefully you know Virgil writes 3 major poems, the Eclogues, the Georgics, and the Aeneid, which is the founding epic of Rome. I have not read the Aeneid. I have not read the Eclogues. So I can't comment on those. I know I'm uncultured swine. I don't know that much about the classics. I have read the Georgics, though, and the Georgics were extraordinarily beautiful. Book 4, which is the last book of the Georgics, is all about bees. It's one of my... I just love it. It is absolutely delightful how much Virgil loves bees. And the reason Virgil loves bees, think about this. Virgil is the poet of the Roman Empire. He is writing for Caesar Augustus. He is saying, we have created the empire, and this is a good thing. Down with the Roman Republic, which is also what Dante thought. Down with the Roman Republic. Roman Empire is awesome. I agree with that. Roman Empire, way better than Roman Republic. But in any case, he says, the model for an empire are bees. Because in bees, you have a society that's hierarchical. Everybody does their proper share. It produces wealth and abundance. And it's ordered. It's beautiful in its order and its intricacy. And that's a model of human life under the Roman Empire, is that everybody does their thing. Everybody has their proper place. And as long as we all act like bees in the hive, we will make honey, we will become wealthy. It's the total opposite of individualism. It's pure like Roman statism. I love it. And so this continues, of course, in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. We will recall, in the English-speaking world, everyone's going to grammar school. Everyone is studying Latin and Greek still. That doesn't change until really about the second half of the 19th century. Everyone is studying Latin and Greek. Anyone who's anybody who's writing poetry is going to know Latin and Greek. And as a result of that, they become part of this discourse. Virgil is standard reading for anyone studying the classics. And we get, in the English-speaking world, in the poems, a discourse of bees equal empire. This is particularly true in the Elizabethan period because bees have a queen. They knew bees had queens. They weren't kings, they were queens. And so one of the justifications on what's called the organic level, political organicism, one of the organic justifications of Queen Elizabeth, which was kind of an aberration if you think about it, was, hey, bees have queens, so it's not unnatural for a woman to lead over men. Because this was a huge controversy. John Knox, the famous Scottish Presbyterian, actually wrote a treatise where he's basically like, yeah, queens ruling over people, don't see that in the Bible. This is unnatural. And one of the defenses was, yeah, maybe it's not in the Bible, but we see it in nature, so it is natural. Bees become the symbol of empire. Let me pull this up. I think it's in the next slide. Yeah, we have this great quote from Henry V. This is the Archbishop of Canterbury speaking to Henry V, talking about bees and how Henry V can learn from observing bees. What does he say? They have a king and officers of sorts, where some, like magistrates, correct at home. Others, like merchants, venture, like merchants. They're not merchants, but they're like our merchants. They venture trade abroad. Others, like soldiers, armed in their stings, make boot upon the summer's velvet buds, which pillage they with merry march bring home to the tent royal of their emperor, who busied in his majesty, right, so they got the gender wrong, but that's okay, who busied in his majesty surveys the singing masons building roofs of gold, the civil citizens kneading up the honey, the poor mechanic porters crowding in their heavy burdens at his narrow gate, the sad-eyed justice with his surly hum delivering over to the executor's pail the lazy yawning drone. And so here we get the discourse of the drone bees as being lazy. Because it's true, the drone bees have no function. They do nothing for the hive other than breed. The drone bees are larger, they get to consume more honey, or excuse me, not honey, they get to consume more pollen, they have higher protein consumption than the rest of the hive, they grow bigger, but their only job is to fertilize the queen's eggs. They basically just like lay around and engage in sexual intercourse. And so for this reason, there's an understanding that drones are kind of lazy. And because of that, discursively, we get a lot of references to drones being like aristocrats by the Enlightenment thinkers, where this is true both on the continent as well as in the colonies. We see pamphlets where the pro-monarchical forces, where the aristocrats are likened to bees or drones. So just a couple I put here, for example, Pain on the Aristocracy. This is from On the Rights of Man. We have there a seraglio of males who neither collect the honey nor form the hive, but exist only for lazy enjoyment. So there he's saying the aristocrats in England, in France, in every country on earth, basically, they don't do anything. They just live off the honey that is produced by the hard worker bees, and they just lay around all day acting like degenerates, which was certainly true of some 18th century aristocrats. No, but like even I, as a defender of monarchy, I'm not going to say that it wasn't the case. It was the case. But we see here, and this is the key thing, bees and aristocracy. Bees and monarchy. They are made to be seen as equals, and that is really important. Discursively, these two things are linked. The next, this is from a private letter from Adams. He's talking actually about, I believe, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's saying, this controversy, I hope, will prevent the future waste of the society's money in the maintenance of insects. He's talking about priests and bishops in the Church of England. Maintenance of insects that are drones in the cause of virtue and Christianity. Yeah, so he says, we stop paying these prebends that go to the Church of England for drones, right, for these lazy bishops and priests who just live off the honey essentially given to them by the hard worker bees. Similarly, in the Declaration, we're told that one of the major offenses of George III, this like totally awful tyrant that the world has never, like the likes of which the world has never seen, which is a joke. George III, if anything, George III's real problem was he was not harsh enough. And I think any sober-minded analyst of the situation will say something similar, is that George II kept things under control because he was a lot harsher and less willing to play ball. George III makes too many concessions. Concessions are a sign of weakness, so on and so forth. Anyway, not the place for that, but you could look into it. Yeah, we have in the Declaration, George III leaves swarms of officers to harass our people, Quartering Act. Swarms. Discursively, we are getting the link that the British, or at least the pro-monarchy forces, the loyalists, the Tories, they are like bees. Whereas we, the colonists, are not insectified in that particular way. Now, if we kind of like tie all these things together, let's go back here. Let's reread the poem, thinking about this. Wine. Is it just wine? Well, maybe it's just wine. But discursively, like we have all this stuff about wine in early colonial America, Madeira, the consumption of Madeira. On top of that, there's another tradition, I forgot to put this in the slide, of what were called the 13 toasts. So maybe you know this, maybe you don't. 13 is like a very heavily symbolic number. You have 13 virtues in Franklin's autobiography. 13 has a set of association in other contexts that maybe you can ask about in the comments. We don't need to get into that too much right here, but there was a big tradition among the patriots, so-called, of making 13 toasts. And 13 toasts were done with Madeira wine. Well, very clearly we're getting Madeira liberty, not just because Hancock named the ship Liberty, but like Madeira is associated with free trade, with Enlightenment ideas, with freedom, with liberty. And so the honeybee then is associated with the opposite. The honeybee is kind of the member of the hive, kind of the member of the hierarchical worldview, kind of the member of this authoritarian system that the Enlightenment thinkers are working against. The honeybee lives in a monarchy. Is the honeybee then, think about this, coded monarchical? Let's think about this. He's saying, what brought you to this glass of wine? Storms, foes, wasps, kingbirds, wars, labors. What he's effectively saying is, you, the supporters of monarchy, you, the loyalists. Now, they're not there anymore, but it's a hypothetical. What brought you to America? Were you fleeing persecution? Were you fleeing a king? Because even, of course, that happened, right? Even people who supported monarchy fled kings. Were you harassed by foes? Were you fleeing the wars of religion? Why did you come to America? You're coming to this beautiful lake. This beautiful lake is freedom. the land of freedom, the land of liberty. Why the land of freedom and liberty? Because it's so big, because it's so vast, because it's so abundant. Here people can be free in salutary neglect prior to the revolution, and after the revolution, free as enshrined by law, as enshrined in the Constitution. We are a people, as a famous phrase goes, conceived in liberty. And so that wine becomes not quite an allegory, but becomes coded for America itself. It's American freedom. Why does the honeybee come to the wine? Because it wants freedom. And what do we notice? That's exactly what's said in the next set of stanzas. I hail you to my class if you imbibe freedom. If you imbibe liberty, you will feel lighter. You will lose your cares. You will drown your griefs. Freedom is the cure for what ails you, honeybee. What you need is freedom. But be careful, because if you get too close to the freedom, you will drown. And is he suggesting, perhaps, that the British came to the American project because of the good things that were there, right? The riches, the freedom, the resources, you can be away from persecution, so on and so forth, and ended up dying as an unintended consequence of coming to the New World? I think this is actually what Philip Freneau is suggesting, is that the British, so-called, come to American freedom and unintentionally get involved. They bite off more than they can chew. Just as the honeybee comes to the wine because it smells sweet, smells like a flower, he bites off more than he can chew and ends up drowning in the wine. The British end up drowning in the freedom that is just an elemental part of being in the New World, and as a result of that, we have the severing of ties, we have bloodshed. There is something to this, because even later, right, he says effectively what? Take not too deep a drink and in the ocean die. You, like Pharaoh, would be said to perish in a sea of red. This was a common code in the revolutionary period. Thomas Paine is the biggest, would you want to say, proponent of this particular code. He is going to say in Common Sense, the famous pamphlet Common Sense, which at some point we should take a look at, George III is Pharaoh. George III is Pharaoh. So just as Pharaoh oppresses the Israelites, George III oppresses the poor American people. And what do the Israelites want? Freedom from slavery. What do Americans want? Freedom from slavery. Now, not literally, they're going to keep slaves for a long time, but they want freedom from slavery, in the sense of they want to be free from George III, who is a tyrant who has enslaved them. Now, that's a ridiculous narrative about the history, but that is the narrative that exists. In fact, most people don't know this. One of the initial seals that was proposed to be the federal seal of the United States of America was Moses parting the Red Sea and Pharaoh drowning in the Red Sea. You can go look that up. One of the initial seals for the federal government in the United States of America was Pharaoh drowning in the Red Sea and Moses parting the Red Sea. And the reason for that was, we are a people of freedom. We are going to the promised land. That goes way back to Puritanism, doesn't it? And also Pharaoh, meaning Europe, monarchy, tyranny, oppression, aristocracy, comes to America to die. And so the bee is being explicitly equated with Pharaoh. You, like George III, you, like Pharaoh in the book of Exodus, poor little honeybee, will drown in a sea of red. Well, Pharaoh dies in the Red Sea, but is he suggesting, no, the honeybee of the British monarchical forces that want to control us, that want to restrict our republican government, are going to drown in freedom. They came to this land seeking promise. They smelled all the good things that we had in America, and the very freedom of the American landscape collapsed then, and it collapsed in on them and drowned them. I think Philip Freneau is actually using this. It's something of a code. He's saying here, and this is super ironic, your epitaph a tear. Is he really going to cry for the bee? We get the sense, no, he's not going to cry for the bee. And that strikes us a little cruel if we just think about it as a honeybee. But if we think about the honeybee as being the British, the forces of reaction on the continent, the forces that support the army, the church, the monarchical institutions, the aristocracy, well, then it makes sense. The tear is ironic. He's not really crying for them. And of course, what is the poet doing? He's drinking the wine. He's drinking the wine because he is an imbiber of freedom. That's why he says bees full 6 feet high. The bees full 6 feet high, who are the bees? They're the drones. They're the drones. They're the useless aristocracy. They're all the people who were against republican government and self-rule in the Americas, at least from Philip Freneau's perspective. Your epitaph will be a tear. Go take your seat in Charon's boat, right, meaning there was death. We'll tell the hive, the mother colony, Mother England, you died afloat, but you died here. You died in the freedom that is innate to the American landscape. Is it a one-to-one allegory? No. Do I think Philip Freneau is doing something deeper with this poem? I most certainly do. And I'm sure some of you, if you go look at the discourse around Madeira wine, around wine in colonial America in general, and around bees and drones, you might see something very similar as well. This is a phenomenal poem. I love reading it. I love sharing it. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next lecture. Take care, guys.